All right, so in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. For those of you in our community who I haven't met yet, I'm David Sarwer. I'm the Associate Dean for Research in the college. I'm also a proud member of our Department of Social and Behavioral Sciences and Director of the Center for Obesity Research and Education. And I want to welcome all of you to our first Friday seminar series session of the year. We launched this seminar series probably about 5 or 6 years ago with the idea of providing an opportunity for our college community to come together. In the earliest of days, we did this in one of the college or one of the university's big auditoriums with the idea of giving us a chance to see each other in person and get together. And that worked well. And then that thing called the pandemic hit, and we all pivoted back to Zoom, which ironically enough, increased our attendance in these sessions by about 20%. So we're going to likely stay with Zoom for a period of time, although I really hope, as I'm sure many of you do, that eventually we'll all get back to a true sense of normal and a degree of comfort of being in spaces together and not worried about infection. But today I'm really thrilled to have a session on the tenure and promotion process. This is something that has come up, and we typically do a session every year or so on this topic, but I think it's so critically important and raises so many interesting and thought-provoking issues for all of us. But with that, I'm going to turn things over to Ross Silverman, our Associate Dean for Faculty Affairs. He's going to lead today's session. I'm going to end with a brief reminder that we do have another session next week. We had a little bit of a glitch getting these on the university's calendar and the college's calendar, but they will be up shortly if they're not up already. And we've got programming scheduled for most of the Fridays throughout the rest of the semester. So I look forward to seeing you take advantage of some of the programming that we're providing to all of you. And with that, I'm going to go behind my screen. I'm going to turn things over to Ross, and I look forward to hearing from our colleagues about the process. Ross?
Thank you, David, and thanks to all of you for being here this afternoon. So today we're going to talk a little bit about the processes associated with promotion. As scholars, this is an opportunity that I think most, if not all of us, face during the course of our professional careers. And what really wanted to have an opportunity to focus on in today's session will relate to the experiences of those who have gone recently successfully through the promotion and or tenure processes here at the college. So what we're going to do is we're going to have a few general questions that we're going to talk through as a panel, and we'll have opportunities for questions from the audience as well, and from all of you. So if you do have questions, you can get them into the chat, and we will make sure that we have time before the end of the hour to talk through those as well. Without further ado, what I'd like to do is allow the panelists to share just a little bit about themselves. And then we'll get into the discussion about preparing for promotion. So on my screen, and we can actually just do this by alphabetically as well. We'll start with Sarah Bass.
Sure. Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm Sarah Bass. I am faculty in social behavioral sciences. I have been on both non-tenure track and tenure track and have gone through promotion to associate professor on non-tenure track, then went through the tenure track process and was tenured about 3 years ago. And I'm actually currently going through promotion to full professor. So I've kind of been at every level. And although I will say that I think a lot of the tips that we'll probably talk about today, doesn't matter which track you're on.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Bari?
Hi, I'm Bari Dzomba. So I came here to Temple in 2018 as a non-tenure track assistant professor of instruction. And then I went through the process of first stepping into a leadership role as a graduate program director. I think that was right around the beginning of 2020. And then I went through the non-tenure track or PERC process for promotion to associate professor of instruction. And I'm in the Health Services Administration and Policy Department, specifically in the Health Information Management and Health Informatics programs.
Thanks, Barry. All right, Beth.
Hi, everybody. My name is Beth Pfeiffer. I'm faculty in the Health and Rehabilitation Sciences department, and I very similarly to Sarah Bass, I was non-tenure track faculty member. I went through promotion to an associate level through that process, and then I switched over to a tenure track line, I guess back in, I don't know when it was at this point, but, and then I went through the tenure process about 2 or 3 years ago at that point. So I have gone through both promotion as an NTT and tenure as a tenure track person.
Thanks. And Jackie.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jackie Phillips. I'm from the Department of Kinesiology. I'm on the non-tenure track or the PERC track, and I went through the promotion process from assistant to associate about 2 years ago.
Fantastic. And so you've already heard a little bit of, one of the terms of art that is cropping up. There's as far there are 2 discrete tracks, one for those who are tenured or tenure track, and the other, as far as the term of art is concerned, we're transitioning more towards use of the term PERC, or for professional, instructional, research, and clinical faculty. But you also may hear that interchangeably with the term NTT or non-tenure track faculty as well. Most of our documents that we have, institutional documents, policy documents, haven't quite yet all been edited to this updated language. So if you're looking for materials associated with the promotion process, it's still going to say non-tenure track or NTT. If you search for those documents in our, usually you can find a lot of these through TU Portal. One thing that I'll also just put up for folks, the general information, and I'll put this in the chat. This is the timelines that are associated with the formal submission of the dossier and review of the dossiers for promotion for both types of faculty. For those who are on the non-tenure track, the review, the formal portion of the review would begin around first of the year with a statement of intent to apply, and then we'll run through the spring as the dossier is completed. Then the dossier is reviewed within the college. On the non-tenure track side, the process formally begins around late March, early April, and then we'll run through essentially the entire following academic year as the dossier is completed by September, and then goes through the college levels of review and then the university levels of review. But that said, hopefully people aren't waking up on December 30th and saying, hey, it's promotion time. So one of the things we wanted to talk a little bit about with all of you is sort of preparing for taking that step. For those who are on the tenure track, there's a set clock. For those who are in the PERC faculty, there may not be a set timeline. You may have more choice as far as when you start that. But I'd be curious to hear a little bit from you about sort of when you started thinking about promotion, and then perhaps some guidance you received that you felt was valuable from mentors or chairs about sort of preparing to take that step towards submitting a dossier?
So I can say from my experience, this process started for me very early on in my position here at Temple. My previous chair, I remember, I think it was the second year I was here, sat down with me in my annual meeting and brought up the process of promotion, which at the time I felt like was so far on the horizon. But he pointed out to me what I should be focusing on building in terms of my repertoire and what I'm doing, and pointed out the areas that he thought would be most difficult for me to build. And I remember him pointing out leadership because I don't have any administrative roles. So that could be a tough one to make sure that I'm building to that point in organizations and communities or exhibiting leadership in different ways too. It doesn't have to be the classic, I am a program director. So he was very mindful to have those conversations with me early on that then pointed me towards the right direction and what to get involved with to build my packet, which was very helpful.
And I'll add too that, department chairs can change because this is a somewhat long process. And I know for me, it was helpful to have a conversation with, we had one department chair, and then that person was in an interim role, and then we had a new chair. And so it was good to continue those conversations and then also get feedback from two different perspectives as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, for me, especially as I transitioned from being an NTT to a TT, having those conversations about how to kind of think about yourself differently and how to present yourself differently with a emphasis more on the research side, instead of leadership and teaching, was really important. And I think those conversations should start very early about how you then start kind of also collecting all of your material and you start kind of presenting yourself to the world.
I know that we're going to probably be talking about how we gather those materials, but one of the things that, just to continue with the theme that people are talking about, that early start is so important. And one of the things that I found really helpful was connecting with somebody that went through the process prior to me, that had all their materials done, that knew what was needed, so that I could talk with them and then start gathering all of those items that I would need for that, and then seeing a model of somebody who is successful in going through that process. And that was extremely helpful. And then also connecting with someone as I got closer to be almost like a mentor through the process. And at the time we had done this in our department where we paired people who had gone through the process and then people that were up and coming in the process, so that that person could be a support person for that person that's going up at that point in time.
So toward this end, Beth, you talked a little bit about you starting to prepare the dossier. I remember when I went through the process a long time ago, I basically had a filing cabinet, and I was throwing every document that I thought might be possibly relevant at some point into this drawer. And then sort of as we got closer to actually having to put together the dossier, then it becomes like, sort of like a beautiful mind kind of moment where you're like trying to move all these different papers that are in any kind of order. So I'm hoping, that you all were a bit more organized than I was as far as keeping your materials or organizing your materials or thinking about their organization. So I'm curious a little bit about, how you manage this information of years of, history of your academic, work, in order to at least start organizing it for synthesis into a dossier.
I mean, one thing I do is I try and keep up to date basically I hate to say it, but like on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. So if, there's a new paper that comes out or a new grant, or, you have a speaking assignment, or you get a great email from a student, that you just start caching those away in electronic files. Because if you wait until it's time to build the dossier, you'll number one, never remember everything that you've done, because we're all very, very busy. And I've had instances where I've had to kind of look back at my calendar for, months backwards saying, wait, didn't I do that thing? And when did I do that? And what was it? And so if you try and keep on top of it as much as you can, it makes it much easier. So, really updating your CV, like anytime something that could be added gets added right away, so that you're not, waiting until the end of the year and saying, wait, what presentations did I do? And then you're trying to recreate everything. And so that's what I've tried to do, so that I don't feel as overwhelmed when I had to come to the process of getting everything together.
I think that's a really good strategy. And I know that even after this last promotion, I actually, right after that was complete, I started files for potentially going up to the next level at some point in time, knowing what that was like. And the first time that I went up for promotion, I actually had binders. We used to have binders that we had to put in, and then the committees would transfer the binders from one section to the other. So it was really interesting. But now you have all these electronic formats, and even screenshotting something and saving it as a file. And I oftentimes will keep a service, teaching, and research scholarship file, so that I can put things in there, and then maybe another one, like if there's kind of miscellaneous things. So I keep that in there, and everything's electronic now. So if you have it in that format already, it makes it easier to manage all the documents and keep track of everything.
And I'll add too, it's great that we have these electronic tools. I also go back in my calendar because that helps remind me of things, but also just taking the time to constantly look back on previous documents, especially for those on the PERC track, where the student feedback forms are a big part of that. And I know we get them sometimes at like weird times, and it's like, I don't have time to read this, but actually going back every few months and just reflecting on what the students say, especially if you have the same cohort of students in different semesters, because it helped me build a timeline. Because one of the things I focused on as part of my narrative was something that didn't work so well in one particular class, where I had this group of juniors, and then I reflected on it and I made changes, and then I had a complete turnaround when I had that same cohort as seniors. So it was helpful to constantly go back and reflect, and then also to take that Word document and just start, even bulleted lists, just put together a timeline, because otherwise, like I don't remember what I did yesterday, and it helps to go back and look at a document that is short enough to just constantly go back and look at.
I was going to say something similar. I just keep a Word doc for each academic year. And I started this for merit reasons of listing in each category: teaching, service, scholarship, just reminders of what I was doing that maybe wouldn't fit into my CV and weren't getting listed there, but would be appropriate to put for merit and promotion. So that's my little dump for all of that. And then I've also made folders in my email too for really nice letters that students have sent, anything that might be applicable, just throwing it into that.
So are there other software tools that other folks use as far as some of these things? We have Word documents, email lists, maybe folders.
I mean, for tenure track faculty, because they have to look at, what's happening, the metrics of, different things. There's a plugin called Altmetrics, which I find really interesting and different, because it looks at the reach of your work beyond kind of the traditional citation idea, and provides kind of visuals of how many times an article has been tweeted or talked about online or things like that. And that's a really easy thing you can plug into your, Google search, and you hit Altmetrics and it comes up with information. So that's one thing you can do. You can also, certainly make yourself a Google Scholar field so that it's tracking you for that. So that's easy to be able to check on a regular basis.
I was going to say something that I remember from when I went through the promotion process for the, I'm getting used to the new terminology, perk line. And I like that word. I like the way that's phrased. But I kept track also of my teaching evaluations because it's really time consuming. As you go through the promotion process, a lot of times they want a summary of your teaching, right? They don't want to look at, they want to know how often, you had uppers and middles and lowers and so on. So it's really a summary. So something that really made it easy was I kept a track of kind of the averages for each semester and then the overall averages. So I did that at the end of each semester with my student evaluations. And that was so nice because I know a lot of other people, and I learned this a couple years after I started from my mentor at the time. And I know that it took a lot of time to do that process.
So as you're, one of the things that Jackie, you kind of, you alluded to in one of your statements was, there are pieces that very clearly fit into particular buckets, right? And so you've got, a publication is going to be, research, a presentation, or a course, syllabus is going to be related to the pedagogy and teaching. Serving as a member of a particular committee is going to be, clearly on service. There are a number of things that kind of may fit into multiple categories. You may have some of your teaching may involve community engagement. And so it may have some aspects that kind of could be service oriented, could inform your service, could inform your writing. How do you make decisions about where you're going to place these sort of in between activities? How do you, and maybe also just talk a little about how you decide, again, what's counted counts, but that's not all of who you are as faculty members. So how do you, weigh things that might fall into in between places as far as deciding whether or not to pursue them while you're also thinking about things like promotion?
So I think for me, this was a part I struggled with a little bit, was identifying sometimes what folders things went into or exactly where to put some pieces that weren't a bullet point that's in the list of things we're working on. So Beth mentioned she had a mentor. I similarly had someone that I would go to and ask questions and how they put together their materials. And at the time, Scott Rutledge was also in place, and I would collect my list of questions and then reach out to him. And a lot of times the answer was, sure, that works. That reasoning sounds great. So I think as long as you're articulating why it would be placed in a certain area or connecting it to the theme you're working on. And for me, teaching was my biggest theme. So helping to connect some of those in between things there seemed most appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would say your statements and your teaching philosophy, those kinds of things are places where you can try to make those connections for the reviewer. I think, having been on the reviewing side, as well as I chair the Great Teacher Committee, so I see a lot of those kinds of portfolios, is that the more you can connect the dots for the reviewer, the better, so that they're not having to really dig into everything because there's so much information. And so, using those statements is a really good way to do that. I also usually do, like, for each section, I do kind of an overview document for the reviewer so that, so like Beth was talking about with the student feedback forms, having some kind of document that's easy for them to see, if it's a table or however you want to do that, that's an overview. Or you could do a research overview that says, these are the grants, these are the publications, this is scholarship, etc. And that's a really good way to try and make those connections for a reviewer as well.
And I like that term that you use, Sarah, connecting the dots, especially for the PERC faculty, because many times we're not principal investigators. If we're part of research, it's more of a supporting role, it's a smaller role. And this way we're able to connect the dots by saying, oh, but we mentored a student, a student worker or a graduate assistant that was on that research project. And so I think that builds that connection between research and teaching, research and mentoring.
As a reviewer too, when you're on the other side of things, I know those statements are where people spend most time reviewing. And I do think that there's some things that fall in both categories. For example, as somebody on a tenure track line, you're going to be supervising a lot of students in research. And so sometimes that seems very service oriented, and sometimes it's really teaching oriented. And then there's the research component of it. So that's a real good example of how it can go across. And that statement that you write can show where that really falls as well, and where that aligns in terms of where you spend the most effort in that. So if it's your research lab, it might be that people are volunteering in your research lab and they're getting that experience and their students. That might look a little different than you being on a dissertation committee for somebody or being the chair of a dissertation committee.
So one of the things, oh, Bari, I'm sorry, go ahead. Were you going to say something?
No, it wasn't.
Oh, all right.
I wasn't saying anything.
Just to pick up on an earlier point, should anyone have questions at any future time or lists of questions, I am also happy to serve as a source for feedback and support in that process. One of the things that I have noticed, now that we're just upon a year here now at Temple, is there isn't a Temple template for things like CVs or narratives or things along those lines. So I'm wondering if you have aspects, for example, that your mentors, your chairs suggested as far as structuring of, let's say, your CV, for how you structured that in order to ease the, again, you're always trying to think of this with the reader or the reviewer in mind. So how you structured your CV in order to make it, make your accomplishments that much easier to identify.
And I can jump in for this one a little bit. I think it depends on what you want to be highlighting. For example, when I was going up for tenure, I really needed to highlight my research scholarship grants publications. So I would format it a little differently than when I went up for promotion, where I was really highlighting my teaching and leadership, areas. So that, I think that can make a really big difference. But what I did was I actually went and asked people for their CVs so I could take a look at them and see successful people who went through the process or who have been promoted even at another institution, so that I could see how they formatted those based on what I was going up for at the time. And that was really helpful.
And I'll say, it also depends if you're PERC or tenure track, because as somebody who came in here, where most of my career was in practice, in industry, I was shocked when I first went into academics and saw someone's resume and it was 49 pages long, because I was used to, you have to keep it to one page. And if you've been working more than 10 years, just drop the last couple of years. And so when I was in industry, we didn't capture every single committee we were on. It was, this is the job, this is the, when you started, these are the top 3 or 4 things that you achieved. And so I wouldn't want to see somebody be discouraged if they came in here as a non-traditional academic. But it would be helpful to see maybe 2 versions of a CV format. One that is for somebody that comes in who has spent time in industry, and one that has gone through the traditional process.
I'm just taking down notes. So others?
I think the only other thing I would add is, again, clarity, so that somebody is not like searching through maybe 49 pages of, what they're most interested in. So, really using headings that are very clear of what is being done. I mean, I remember at one point when I was going up for tenure track, the response was, you need to number all of your publications. And that, I hadn't. And so that was an easy way for somebody to be able to kind of look down your list of publications and see how many you had, instead of having to go through and count them on their own. So it's, easy things like that again make it accessible quickly for somebody who's reviewing it.
I've found with regard to those types of things, yes, absolutely. You want to have them numbered, and you want the most recent ideally at the top.
Mm-hmm.
If you have URLs associated with your presentations, your publications, there is nothing wrong with hot linking those things. In fact, I encourage it as again, from a transparency, from an opportunity to share that information with reviewers. If colleagues are looking to, or other people in your field happen upon your CV, again, you can send them on to the work that you've done. If it can be provided open access, that's even better. Again, just to make it as easy as possible. When you've mentored somebody, to have some sort of a sign, associated with that presentation or that publication that indicates, that this was a student, that was involved under your leadership. Again, if you're first author or senior author, those types of things, all I think, if you can have shortcut, easy signals, and you give, some signposts in your document that, let people know what all the different symbols might mean, or if it's bolded or underlined or what have you. I think those all really help people better understand the scope of your impact. When it comes to writing, both promotion processes ask for a narrative, and most of our time we don't spend. I don't know about you, but I don't think you all are spending all of your time writing about yourselves. But that's not always the most comfortable place for an academic to be, is like, brag about yourself, talk about your achievements, talk about how great you are, and having to write from that viewpoint. I'm wondering what guidance you've received, what suggestions you might offer about helping people prepare to appropriately brag on themselves as far as a personal narrative, and then also talk a little bit about how you might, again, we don't have a standardized format, but how you might suggest structure as far as personal narratives are concerned.
I was just thinking about your first question. How do you brag about yourself? So this is really hard for a lot of us, as you said. I know it was tremendously hard for me. You want a really good story to tell there, though. Like when somebody else is reading that, you want it to be interesting. You want it to be easy to read. And so sometimes I would think about, let me take this information and pretend it's not me a little bit. I know that sounds odd, but like if I'm really good about writing things about other people, and not necessarily myself, and kind of putting people up on a pedestal, just trying to strengthen other people. And so sometimes I kind of thought about it that way. I'm like, okay, how would I tell the story if it wasn't mine? Let me look at stuff, and then I would do it that way. And that made it easier for me to get it down on paper. Now that's just a strategy I used. I know that might be a little odd to some people, but I know it made it easier for me to write that. And I also talked with other people. What do you think I should highlight? What do you think I should put in there? What do you think about me that you think is important for other people to know?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, part of my response is get over it, because it's just the process. Like, it's what we're required to do. So, and I think you do get better at it as time goes by. But I think having those conversations with others. So one of the things that I did was I talked to people and said, from your perspective, what do I do? And that was helpful.
When you say what do I do, mean like explain my work?
Yeah, like if you had to explain what I do, what would you say? And so that was interesting. And then I did a little bit of, just if I was explaining what I did, what would that be? And that helped, at least for me, to kind of distill down what the overall messages were. I mean, for me too, I'm a methods person. It can be applied to a lot of different areas. And so I'm not like some tenured faculty who have like one very specific area that they work in. And so for me, it was, how do I explain this method across these different populations or topics? And so I think it definitely takes practice and kind of talking with people, and to, pat yourself on the back and say, hey, I have done some interesting work or interesting things, and it's okay to say that.
And I'll say that this is a place where I thought you could be creative. Although, I was a little nervous because I felt like I was taking a risk in that, am I being too creative? Because I went about it a little bit different, and I thought, I really don't want this to be like a repeat of my CV. And what makes one particular activity more important than another? And so I looked for what is the purpose and the impact that I wanted to show. And it took me a while. And I eventually came up with, I'm really here for change. Like, I want to see change for the better in our students, in my peers, whether they're faculty, staff, alumni, student workers. And then I also wanted to show personal growth, because for me, I can't stand in front of a class of students if I'm not also learning and growing, especially from learning from them and learning from my peers and colleagues. And then also showing, the impact of what I'm doing. How is that impacting others? How is it supporting them? And when I say take a risk, and this is actually pretty good timing, because one of the things I talked about was that the dangers of student surveillance systems. And then this morning when I saw the email from Jamie about, Temple University is not going to require students to turn their cameras on for room scans, which is a part of student surveillance systems, I thought, what, I'm really glad that I did write about that, because it was important to me. And when I thought about what I'm putting into my narrative, I thought, okay, I'm taking a risk, but if somebody thinks I'm writing about something that they don't agree with, or it's silly, then it is what it is. Because you have to stay true to yourself and your values and do what you think represents you the best in your personal narrative.
So to build on what was just said, growth and impact, I think those are two very important terms here. And growth, something you don't necessarily see in your CV. So you have the opportunity to show it in your narrative and to expand on where you improved in your teaching specifically over the years, but also impact. So showing, did you implement a new software or redesign a course and your grades increased, or certain aspects of your course you saw greater student satisfaction with, and showing that impact in different ways. So I think the narrative's a great place to put it. I remember when I sat down to write it, I was so nervous to write it because I don't like writing about myself. But then you think about all the work that you've done and what you're proud of. And I remember just putting everything down, and I think I had twice the amount of pages that were recommended and was very surprised by that. So I found it difficult to be concise with it and to make sure that I'm being clear with my themes throughout it.
I just want to say too, Cheryl Hyde just put in the chat as a reviewer that one of the things she looks at is kind of attention of how someone has developed over time and kind of this planned trajectory. And I think that's a really good way to think about it as well, especially, you know, like Bari, I came into academics with a lot of kind of community-based work and had worked for health departments, state health departments, and those kinds of things. And it was important for me to kind of build that narrative to you know, say why I was passionate about what I'm doing now and how that built in it over time. And I think that's also really good for reviewers. They are able to kind of see the context in which you have worked and what's important to you.
So toward that end, a couple of things just to, you know, I think you know, from a structural perspective, I do think it is important as someone who's done a lot of reviewing of dossiers over the years. You know, part of the trajectory has to include what's next. You know, that there is a, you know, again, we talk about these you know, we always use that phrase, it's a marathon, not a sprint. And yet at the same time, you don't want it to be like the first marathon where the person dies at the end of the, you know, when they get to the finish line, right? So it's, you know, here again, we want to see that this is, that the point of promotion is a point in a continuing growth process for faculty. And it doesn't mean that you're, you know, may not start exploring. Again, I'm also a big fan of people who take on new perspectives, take on new ideas, take on new challenges, you know, at different, you know, at periodic phases in their career, but that you do have a plan and that you do have, you know, that you haven't sort of taken all of your shots to get to this point, and then you know, that's going to be sort of the end of the innovation, the end of the growth as far as the process is concerned. So I do think within the narrative, it's important to talk a bit about where you're going to be taking things next. As far as the length, again, we don't have standardized recommendations as far as it's concerned. I do find that if you're at about the 3,500 to 4,000 word point, you should be able to sort of encapsulate your narrative within, you know, that's 8 to 10 pages as far as, you know, a typical narrative is concerned. If you're, you know, again, doesn't mean you have to get to 8 if you've got, you know, if you're you know, a tight writer. But beyond that, it does become almost a recital of, well, then I did this and then I did that, and here's 17 different pieces of evidence to show you that I did this and that. So those kinds of structures where, again, you begin perhaps with philosophy and that overarching narrative, and then you can weave how the different areas of your responsibility fit into that theme is a, you know, and then concluding with what's next. You know, it's a good sort of basic structure to start from. A couple of you mentioned impact. That is not always the easiest thing to measure. There are, you know, I do think increasingly it's important to share evidence that, you know, what you're doing has fostered some change or has been has been seen or has been adopted. Altmetrics is one way of looking at these, and looking at and we should mention, I've seen narratives that include graphics. I've seen narratives that include charts in them. I've seen Venn diagrams in order to describe how different areas or network type things to show how different topical areas all fit around a common theme. But how do you talk about how do you measure impact? How do you capture information about impact that you would share later in a narrative or another documentation in your dossier?
I'll say that you're right, Ross. It is hard to measure impact, and you don't want to just spit out output, because output isn't very meaningful. But feedback from students, specific feedback, because in addition to student feedback forms, students many times will write personal notes. They'll come to your office and say certain things. You'll see their growth, and some students will graduate and they'll get amazing jobs, and they'll comment something out on LinkedIn, thanking faculty. I see that with our undergrad students a lot. They'll thank all of the BSHIM faculty. So to me, that was one way to measure, even though it may have been qualitative measurement.
Sure. Others?
To build on that, you can even use some of that to do scholarship in the teaching area, which is a nice way to hit some different categories. So I know for me personally, I did some changes, sent out surveys to students, was able to present that at conferences and work in that way. So a different way to show impact while also serving other purposes.
I think, on the research side, the traditional ways that they look at impact often dampen the actual impact of what a lot of us do in public health, because we aren't going to be in JAMA usually, right? That has such a huge impact factor. And so what I tried to do again was kind of an overview in that folder that kind of said, listen, while the Journal of Health Communication may only have an impact factor of 3 or 2 point something, it is the journal in my discipline, and this is the number of times that I've published in it or something like that. So trying to again give it some context. I think the altmetrics is really interesting too, because it will rank each article in how much coverage it's gotten, and you can visually show that. There's these 6 articles in there in the top 10% of all the articles that have been shared or talked about, and so some of that helps to give it some of that context.
There's also times, I think this happens most often with research and scholarship too, that your research or work that you've done has impacted, let's say, a policy decision, or it's impacted how something has been done clinically. So maybe that's some teaching. And so if you have moments where you can identify that, or documents where you can, sometimes it's mentioned, you're referencing something really, really important to your profession, or cited, or some president of your organization is talking and they mentioned something that you did, or something along that line. So if there's a way to document that, I think that, or identify that, I think that's something that you should think about including, that you might not think about as you do that.
Want to make sure again, if folks have questions, I mean, we can take some in the chat. I don't know. I guess we can also hear them when we open up for questions from the group directly. So we have one last question that I just wanted to pose before we get to that point of hearing from audience members and from those who are listening and watching. Sarah and Beth, as you both mentioned, you both have gone through both processes within the college. Can you talk a little bit about differences that you've seen as far as, I mean, in addition to prioritizing scholarship in one and TG, are there differences as far as how you approached preparation, how you approached your narrative, aside from maybe, shifting sections or adding or building out, one section over another?
Beth, you want to say something? You want me to?
It's an interesting question because I think that is the main difference in a lot of ways, what you emphasize and what you demonstrate that you're doing. And obviously in the positions you spend your time differently as well. So I think it's just a natural process of what's included in there based on where you spend your time and your focus, and what you want to emphasize is what you've done that you think is worthy of promotion or tenure. So really that's where for me, that's where I feel like it landed. I don't feel like there was a lot of other differences in that way.
Yeah.
Sarah, do you have anything that you...
Yeah, no, I would agree. I think that, I think the way that you present yourself, especially in your statement in that first paragraph or so, definitely changes, because what you're trying to emphasize is your scholarship and research piece. But other than that, it's really how you're putting the priorities of things based on what that position is requiring of you. But I think the process itself was exactly the same, which is, you're making sure that you're keeping copies of everything and you have all of that as you go forward.
There was, and I can't remember, I know we needed external letters when I went through promotion on the PERC line or the NTT line at that point in time, but I don't know if that's a different process now, where external letters are definitely needed when you're going up for promotion or for tenure, and how many you might need. I don't know if that differs between the two lines at this point.
Yeah, so we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A, one of which is around external reviewers.
Right. Well, where is let's see. Well, I don't see them. So if you see them,
so down at the bottom where it says Q&A, there's a couple. So Eileen has one that says, can you discuss who selects the external reviewers for tenure track? So I know, at least for mine, since I just went through this process, you're usually asked as the applicant for a few names, and then your chair provides some names, and then the dean's office provides names, and then the dean's office are the ones who ultimately will reach out and choose.
So yeah, so external reviewers, again, there's a provision that says that essentially they can't have any significant connection to you as a scholar. So they can't have been a mentor or mentee. They can't have been on a grant with you. They can't have been on a publication with you. Those are really kind of the big rocks. For the tenure track process, there's 7 letters will be the minimum that need to come in. A maximum of 2 of them will be provided from a list that's provided by the faculty member. The others will all come from the list that is provided by the department chair. Laura Cinco's question actually is one thing I want to hold Laura's as sort of a concluding statement type of thing from all of you, which is essentially like the one thing you wish you knew, or one piece of advice that you would have, that you hope everybody kind of comes away with in preparing. Really quickly, can we touch on the altmetric, what altmetric is?
Yeah, so I just put the URL in the chat. So you can go there, and it actually has a plugin you can download that'll then it'll be on your Google, what do you call those? Like search bar up at the top, and You then, if you are on any kind of, so you can look yourself up actually at the website. So that's one way to do it. And you can get kind of a report of all of your recent publications and kind of where they fall in the altmetric universe. But then also if you have an article that's up on your screen, you can hit the altmetric button and it will pop up and let you know what the reach of that particular article is as well.
So yeah, so oftentimes that's one thing that you can find, and it'll say this article has been tweeted 12 times. It has been, cited in these 7 journals. It's, and relative to other publications within this journal, it'll also sort of show you how much dissemination there has been around that article compared to other similar types of articles within that journal. So we're getting very close to the top of the hour. With regard to final pieces of advice, what's one thing that's that you felt was incredibly valuable, or one thing that you think would be incredibly valuable to faculty who are getting ready to go through these processes?
I would just suggest starting that organization process and saving materials and information early from the beginning, so that you have that all ready to go, and then you can choose if you need to, or compile that information instead of finding it.
I would say just remember you're not alone, that there are very many resources for you, colleagues that have gone through the process. I think we've all talked about, the importance of talking to people. My chair, Steve Laporte, was so helpful going through this process, both before and during, supportive in all different ways, not only just helping with thinking through how to position myself differently coming off a non-tenure track position, but then also just through the process of being kind of emotionally supportive, because the process is stressful. And so remember that you have those resources, you have those of us who have been through the process to talk to, even if you're just wanting to vent, that's okay too, that, those things are there for you.
I was just going to say to grab a mentor. So find someone in your department who's gone through the process recently, so you have someone to go to with questions and who will read your narrative and help with that. And then something super granular, I don't know if it's the same, but everything had to be labeled in a very specific way, all files. And I remember I saw that towards the end of putting everything together, and I was like, to go back now and spend time doing that. So make sure you pay attention to those details too.
And I'll just add, as an IT and data person, keep backup copies of everything.
It's good advice, Bari.
Well, thank you all so much for taking time this afternoon and sharing your experiences and discussing these topics with everybody. And thank you all very much for participating in this afternoon's session. Next week, as David talked about, there will be another session at 1 p.m. Next Friday, again by Zoom. And if you need additional information or would like additional information to talk about these processes, I can speak for myself. Don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm happy to talk through these things. I'm not gonna, you might sidle up to one of our panelists and ask if they want if they might talk about it as well. I'm not going to volunteer them. They're all very busy and very active already. But wish you all best of luck and enjoy your weekend.